Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And this very sweltering afternoon, I'm very glad to see that the air conditioning is holding up in this room. It's a great pleasure for the ISS to welcome Foreign Secretary Nirupama back to the ISS to discuss the key priorities for India's foreign policy. The Foreign Secretary made her last visit to the ISS in February 2010 to coincide with the third round of the bilateral strategic dialogue that exists between the ISS and the Ministry of External Affairs. We are certainly very proud of that dialogue, which fits prominently into a wider pattern of systematic, regular interaction between the ISS and foreign ministries throughout South Asia. And that's a process led on the ISS side by our Senior Fellow for South Asia, Rahul Roy Chaudhry. And indeed, we look forward to taking a senior-level ISS delegation to New Delhi in the middle of November this year for the fourth round of our bilateral dialogue, when we expect to tackle issues such as Afghanistan and the emerging role of China in the international system, among many others. And we hope and expect once again to have senior-level participation from India in the next IISS South Asia Security Conference in Muscat, Oman, which will deal with counter-terrorism challenges, Afghanistan, and which will take place just a week after the Bonn meeting on Afghanistan in December. Now, the Foreign Secretary's remarks are going to be wide-ranging and will touch on a variety of global issues, but I think it's also important to take note of the fact that these will be her first public policy address since the talk she held in Islamabad with counterparts in the last few days, and I'm sure that there'll be questions from you on that. Foreign Secretary Rao will speak for about 15 minutes or so, yielding the balance of her time, as they say in the US Senate, to you, the audience, for what we hope will be a very interactive period of questions and answers. So, Foreign Secretary, very welcome again, and can I encourage you to take this podium? Thank you.
Adam Ward, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It's indeed an honor and a privilege for me to be back at the IISS on this warm Monday afternoon. India and the UK share a special and unique relationship. There are shared values and ties that bind us, with the ideals of democracy, the rule of law, inclusiveness and pluralism informing the political systems of both our nations. Our multifaceted bilateral relationship with the UK was infused with further strength after its upgradation to the level of a strategic partnership in 2004. Importantly, the visit of Prime Minister David Cameron to India in July 2010 saw these relations elevated to an enhanced partnership for the future. You sense from all this that the partnership between our two democracies is going to further strengthen and deepen in the years to come. As open, pluralistic societies, we understand well that respect for freedom and human rights must inform the emerging world order. We also take great pride in the fact that along with giving importance to our political, economic, and commercial ties, we emphasize our educational, scientific, tourism, and cultural cooperation. In global affairs, India holds as its lodestar the values and the ideals of multilateralism, peaceful coexistence, justice, freedom, equality, and fraternity, which are required for an equitable and sustainable world order in the 21st century. With our vision firmly rooted in these values, we seek to engage the international community in essential reforms of international governance so that it is much more tuned in to the atmospheric space of the 21st century. Today, it is normal to speak of the dynamic Indian growth story despite the ravages of the global economic crisis. But to put your arms around the Indian experience, you must understand the nation as it has evolved and acquired its current attributes. Our republic is 61 today, and the course of our foreign policy also covers almost the same period. As the country has grown, so also our foreign policy has evolved, innovated, and adjusted to changed global circumstances in accordance with the national interest. A fundamental goal of India's foreign policy is to promote our economic growth targets and ambitions in a conducive and a peaceful, stable external environment. India is placed in an extremely complex neighborhood which has seen rapid and often turbulent change in the last 30 years. A peaceful periphery is an irreducible requirement for the success of our efforts to accelerate domestic economic development. This thread runs through our foreign policy. With our largest neighbor, China, we have consciously practiced a policy of engagement that has yielded positive dividends. Although there is an unresolved boundary question between our two countries, which should be settled on mutually acceptable terms, we have not held the rest of the relationship hostage to this complex issue. We have also collaborated usefully on a variety of multilateral issues. With Pakistan, we have consistently made efforts to go back to the negotiating table to solve difficult issues. We have striven to promote better relations with Pakistan. Naturally, such relations can only grow in an atmosphere free of terror and violence. The trajectory of our relationship over the last few decades has been distorted and adversely impacted by the factor of cross-border terrorism. A stable Pakistan, which acts as a bulwark against terrorism and extremism, is in its own interest and also in the interest of our region. I have just returned from a productive and positive round of talks with Foreign Secretary Bashir in Islamabad. We help Afghanistan in its reconstruction efforts with the aim of bringing peace and stability to that country. During his recent visit to Afghanistan in May, our Prime Minister announced an additional assistance of $500 million over and above India's existing commitments of $1.5 billion. India's assistance program is spread across Afghanistan and spans almost the entire gamut of economic and social developmental activities. It places particular emphasis on capacity building and human resources development. With Bangladesh, with whom we share the longest border among any of our neighbors, relations have improved significantly over the past 2 years. Our dialogue has yielded benefits for both countries in a people-centered manner that stresses trade, connectivity, easier transit, development, and the enhancement of mutual security cooperation against insurgency and terrorism. There is enhanced trust and mutual confidence that oxygenates our relationship today. With Sri Lanka, the end of the civil war has brought historic new opportunities for reconciliation between the Tamil and Sinhalese people and for the reconstruction, rehabilitation, and economic development of the northern and eastern provinces. Mahatma Gandhi called India Sri Lanka's nearest neighbor. It is through that prism that we see our ties with this island nation. The satisfactory conclusion of the peace process and constitution drafting are eagerly awaited goals in Nepal, both for the people of that country and for India, because of the symbiotically close relations we share. We have articulated a policy in our neighborhood that emphasizes the advantages of building networks of interconnectivity, trade, and investment so that prosperity can be shared and so that the region can benefit from India's rapid economic growth and rising prosperity. We want to create an environment with our neighbors that enables us to work together to fulfill our common objectives of economic development. In this context, I sense a new vigor and dynamism in the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, or SARC as it's known, which has completed 25 years of existence in 2010. This has been generated as a result of initiatives taken by the member states in recent years that herald the move of the association from a hitherto largely declaratory phase to an implementation phase. India's enhanced profile in SARC in recent years is based on an asymmetrical and non-reciprocal approach where we are willing to go the extra mile in order to strengthen regional cooperation. Our Look East policy, enunciated in the early 90s, represented India's vision of the changing dynamic in international relations. It was meant, at a fundamental level, to reconnect and reach out in the civilizational space we share with our near neighbors in Southeast Asia and catalyze the sharing of capacities and opportunities to improve the economic well-being of our peoples. Our relationship with ASEAN was a natural pivot in this deepening collaboration. It is a fact little recognized that India is as much a Southeast Asian nation as a South Asian nation, given the rich linguistic and ethnic mosaic of our Northeast and the fact that we share borders with a large ASEAN nation, Myanmar. Our Andaman and Nicobar Islands chain are also in the very close vicinity of Southeast Asia. 2 decades of India's Look East policy have, therefore, seen India's quick integration with Southeast and East Asia at the strategic, political, economic, cultural, and people-to-people levels. This, to me, also represents the renewal of the rich civilizational contact expressed in India's links and its interaction with this region in the annals of history. India has strongly supported the process of reform and restructuring of the UN to make it better equipped to effectively respond to an era of transformational change in global affairs. India, along with Brazil, Germany, and Japan, together known as the G4 countries, has proposed expansion of the Security Council membership from the current 15 to 25 members, with the addition of 6 permanent and 4 non-permanent members. The G4 efforts have helped launch the text-based intergovernmental negotiations in the UN on Security Council reforms in July 2010. This was a significant development after many years of meandering discussion. The effort is an ongoing one, and support for reform and expansion from member countries is growing in a substantive manner. India joined the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member on the 1st of January this year for a 2-year term after winning a record number of votes. In these 6 months, our focus and effort has been concentrated on the need for resolution of conflict through reasoned negotiation and diplomatic means rather than the use of force. We have also supported the greater involvement of regional organizations like the African Union in the resolution of disputes with their neighbors. India is one of the oldest, largest, and consistent contributors to the UN peacekeeping operations. It is currently the 3rd largest troop contributor, with 8,691 personnel deployed with 9 UN peacekeeping missions. The high standards of performance maintained consistently by the Indian troops and policemen, including our women personnel, I might add, deployed on UN missions under challenging circumstances, have won them high regard. As the chair of the Security Council's Counterterrorism 1373 Committee, the CTC, and the 1566 Working Group, we are committed to taking global counterterrorism efforts forward. We also consider the 1267 regime against Al-Qaeda and Taliban as a core instrument available to the international community in our fight against terrorism. The challenge before the 1267 regime is to ensure complete commitment to eliminating the scourge of terrorism and to resist the dilution of such efforts for reasons that may seem compelling today but may not withstand the test of ground realities. Adoption of a comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, the CCIT, a draft for which was proposed by India way back in 1996, is a key objective for us. We feel that with some modifications, the text currently being discussed in the working group of the 6th Committee of the UNGA could find acceptability with the majority of member states. India has committed its full support to international anti-piracy efforts. An Indian naval ship deployed in the Gulf of Aden has successfully thwarted several piracy attempts and provided security escort to several merchant ships in these waters. As a founder member of the Contact Group on Piracy off the Coast of Somalia, the CGPCS, India actively participates in its deliberations and anti-piracy efforts. The Indian Navy also coordinates and shares operational information with other navies under the Shared Awareness and Deconfliction, the SHADE mechanism. India has welcomed efforts for countering piracy by the enhancement of regional cooperation and capacity building of littoral states. We also support determined action against the kingpins, the financiers, and facilitators of piracy through tracking of financial flows. A key issue for India is the welfare of hostages in the custody of pirates. India remains steadfast in its commitment to the goal of global, universal, and non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament as outlined in the Rajiv Gandhi Action Plan. We believe that nuclear disarmament can be achieved by a step-by-step process underwritten by a universal commitment and an agreed multilateral framework for achieving global, non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament in a verifiable manner. India is willing to engage in meaningful dialogue among all states possessing nuclear weapons to build trust and confidence and reduce the salience of nuclear weapons in international affairs and security doctrines. India supports negotiations in the Conference on Disarmament towards a universal, non-discriminatory, and verifiable FMCT that bans the future production of fissile materials for weapons purposes. Over the recent years, our civil nuclear initiative has resulted in international civil nuclear energy cooperation with various international partners, including the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, Canada, etc. This has reflected recognition of India's impeccable non-proliferation record and its contribution to global non-proliferation objectives. We have in place strict and effective controls over the export of sensitive items in line with the best international standards. India has expressed interest in the full membership of the 4 multilateral export control regimes, which we believe will be mutually beneficial. We are engaged with the regimes and the regime members and hope to make progress in that direction with the support of our partners, including the UK. The tragic incident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan has raised worldwide concerns about the safety aspects of nuclear power. The lessons learned from the Fukushima incident will be useful for the global nuclear power industry. At the national level, India is taking measures to reassure our people about the safety of our nuclear power plants, including technical review of safety of our plants and strengthening the safety regulatory framework. We also participated in the recent IAEA Ministerial Conference on Nuclear Safety in Vienna. Climate change is an extraordinary global challenge facing humanity today and requires an urgent, collective, and coordinated global response. For the developing countries, the issue of climate change goes beyond environmental sustainability and directly impacts on their developmental aspirations. The global effort to address climate change must be anchored to the basic principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR, and respective capabilities. Equitable burden sharing that provides for an equal sharing of the resource of the atmosphere for all human beings is a natural expectation we have from the ongoing negotiations. Talks in Bangkok and Bonn this year have shown that for a successful outcome at COP17 in Durban, it would be important to maintain a balance between the operationalization of the Cancun decisions and working on the unresolved issues under the Bali Action Plan. This and urgent implementation of commitments by Annex I parties for a second commitment period under the Kyoto Protocol would be the key to a comprehensive, ambitious, and balanced outcome at Durban. For a country like India, with one of the smallest carbon footprints in the world, the first and overriding priority is to pursue economic development, to alleviate poverty, and to address our severe energy deficit. 500 million people in India still need to be given access to commercial energy. Any international agreement will therefore have to be sensitive to the enormous challenges we face in bringing the benefits of growth to the poorer sections of our population. In conclusion, I'd like to reassert that India's foreign policy is an amalgam of national interests, our conviction that inclusive structures of dialogue and cooperation to address the new dimensions of security threats are necessary, that the institutions of global governance, including the United Nations, should reflect current realities, and that the dynamism and the energy of the Indian economic growth story must be shared in our region, and that to sustain our growth trajectory, we need an environment that is free from transnational threats like terrorism. I thank you.
Well, thank you very much for an address that was as wide-ranging as advertised. You began by setting out the values content of Indian diplomacy, the economic imperatives that are driving it, some of the steps which India is taking to deal with a very stringent regional security environment, and yet at the same time to reach out to new centers of strategic gravity like China and other clusters such as ASEAN. And you outlined, I think, very effectively some of the hard security-linked priorities that India has set itself during its non-permanent membership of the UN Security Council, which has, as you noted, coincided with a period of great upheaval in the Middle East and North Africa, where, after all, many of India's interests are very immediately engaged. So it's now time for questions and answers. If you'd like to ask a question, please catch my eye. I'll make a list as best I can and try to fit in as many people as possible. The first person to catch my eye off the mark was Rahul Roy Chaudhary from the ISS.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for a very useful set of remarks on key priorities for India's foreign policy. I want to follow up on your remarks on Afghanistan particularly. In the past 18 months, there has been a significant shift in India's policy towards the Afghan-led political reconciliation and reintegration process in Afghanistan. From a view in New Delhi that the only good Taliban was a dead Taliban, India has now supported the reintegration process for low-level Taliban insurgents. Indeed, when you spoke at the IISS last year, you clearly spelled out the preconditions for such a process. Last month, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in Kabul, for the first time, publicly supported the Afghan peace plan for reconciliation with high-level Taliban insurgents, although he did not elaborate on any preconditions. Yet earlier this year, US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton apparently signaled a shift in US policy when she said that the 3 red lines for talks with the Taliban, the renunciation of violence, abandonment of an alliance with Al-Qaeda, and abidance by the Afghan constitution were necessary outcomes rather than preconditions. My questions to you, Madam, are twofold. Firstly, what are the red lines or guidelines for India's support to the Afghan-led process of political reconciliation? Are these preconditions or necessary outcomes? Secondly, if India is to continue to retain influence in Afghanistan in the foreseeable future, it will at some stage need to reach out to the Taliban, as other major powers like the US and the UK are currently doing. What would any red lines for New Delhi in such engagement with the Taliban be? For example, would the reconcilable Taliban also need to formally cut off all links with the Lashkar-e-Taiba and not permit anti-India terror camps in Afghanistan? Would this need to be part of a peace settlement that is acceptable to all Afghans? Thank you.
Quite an elaborate question, that.
If you leave it up.
Is that okay? Okay. Well, I think the first thing I'd like to emphasize is our undiluted support to the government and the people of Afghanistan as they strive to bring peace and stability to that country. Our relationship with Afghanistan is not a relationship that was just established day before yesterday. It's a long-standing linkage, and it is manifest in the very strong people-to-people ties that we have with that country, not confined to just one region of Afghanistan alone. In fact, every day today in India, we have at least 500 Afghans who arrive on the many flights from Afghanistan into India just for education purposes, just to seek medical treatment or to meet with relatives in India. So it's a very enduring relationship. Now, when we talk of stability and peace and normalization of conditions in Afghanistan, obviously we would like it to be Afghan-led, we would like it to be inclusive, we would like it to be transparent. Now, the red lines that were defined at the Afghanistan conference here in London last year, in our mind, are still very relevant. That for reconciliation to succeed, whatever the semantics you may use in this regard, whether it's a precondition or whether it's an outcome, the fact is that for reconciliation to succeed, whoever is being reconciled will have to give up violence, will have to give up terrorism, will have to give up links with the Al-Qaeda, will have to subscribe to the ideals of the Afghan constitution. So as far as India is concerned, our concerns about those principles have in no way abated. They are still very important to us. But our discussions with the Afghan government and the stakeholders in the establishment there reveal that they are not seeking merely military means to solve this problem. They are also exploring the possibilities of political dialogue with those that need to be reconciled. Now, this is not an experiment that is unique to Afghanistan alone. It has been tried in different parts of the world, and in India included. So what we want is for the end goal in all this that is happening in Afghanistan to be good for the Afghan people. And it's very important also in this process and in this very fluid phase that Afghanistan is going through, that we must focus on building capacity for Afghanistan to handle its own security, better governance capabilities. And that's where Afghanistan's friends and partners come in. And that's where the region, I believe, has to play a very important role. You have to build more connectivity, you have to build trade, you have to build links that help Afghanistan to come out of its long, dark night. And as far as the LET and others are concerned, obviously, linkages, any linkages with groups like the LET, which is also closely linked to Al-Qaeda, are impossible to contemplate any continuation of such links if Afghanistan has to be peaceful and if conditions there have to return or be normal once again. So groups like the LET and the Al-Qaeda have to be resisted with all the means at our command.
Thank you. Philip Stevens from Financial Times.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. I wonder whether I could tempt you to say a little bit more about great power relations. For an outsider, India sort of often looks sort of perched between its previous role as a champion of the non-aligned movement and a future role as a big, indeed great power. But it's a sort of awkward balancing act. And I wonder how long do you think that India can sort of be outside the room and inside the room at the same time? And as far as China's concerned, it looks like you have a policy of engaging and hedging. What does that say about your relationship with the United States?
Well, I think there are a lot of stereotypical views about India, and I'm not about to get into a debate about that, about being inside and outside at the same time. I don't think you've got the picture as far as that is concerned, because I spoke in my address just now about how our foreign policy has evolved, has innovated, has adapted to change global circumstances. And I think that applies to any country in the world, and particularly to India. A country of India's size, with the security challenges that we face, the compulsions of economic growth and development, the need to be open to the outside world in order to attract technology, knowledge, ideas, capital. So this is a different India. This is an India that has grown, that has matured, that has evolved, and that is very, very alert to the surrounding environment, whether it's the immediate periphery or whether it's the larger global environment in which we are placed. So in the last 18 to 20 years, you've seen the evolution of the Look East policy. You've seen the manner in which our ties with China have evolved. You've seen the relationship we've established with the United States, which, as President Obama referred to when he came to Delhi last year, is one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century. And that transformation in India-US relations has been one of the major features of Indian foreign policy in the last decade. So, and with Russia, and that by no means is to suggest that the ties with Russia have in any way been subsumed in a larger process of transformation of relations that we've had with other major countries. The ties with Russia are still very important to us, and it's borne out in the fact that you have the leadership level summits held annually, the defense relationship that we have with Russia. And it's a very long-standing relationship. It's a rock-solid relationship that has remained very relevant and valid and crucial for our foreign policy interests. But I think India's profile, global profile, has transformed itself, and you see it for yourself in the role that we are seeking to play in Africa, in our profile as a country that is able to deliver on development cooperation and assistance in the developing world, and also in our immediate neighborhood. In the line and in the approach we've taken in SAARC, I referred to the asymmetrical, non-reciprocal responsibilities that we are prepared to assume. And also in the Indian Ocean, because the fact is that our security concerns extend into the Indian Ocean and into the profile that the ocean builds for itself in coming decades. It is a major transportation and communication link between our part of the world and east and west, literally. And I believe India has the capacity and the capability to play a unique role in that context also, both in the security dimension and also in the development dimension of the littoral states of the Indian Ocean. So all in all, I think I would answer your question by saying that this is a transforming India and this is a transformed India. And the old epithets and definitions may no longer apply.
Thank you very much. Gentleman in the second row, could you just identify yourself when the microphone reaches you?
Thank you. Madam Secretary, my name is Mahmoud Ali. I'm just a member of the Institute. Thank you very much for an illuminating overview of India's foreign policy priorities. My question is parallel to the just previous question that you addressed. I wonder whether, in terms of how India views itself for the next 5 to 10 years, the balance between competition and cooperation, where do you think that lie as far as China is concerned, especially in Southeast Asia? Where In Southeast Asia, India has definitely established itself as a major actor among ASEAN member countries. But with, I think, the temperature rising around South China Sea, there is a lot of concern about what happens there in security terms. I wonder whether India has a particular point of view with regard to how the current disputes can be addressed, if not resolved. Thank you.
To answer your question about competition and cooperation, I think the defining principle that we would apply to our relationship with China is engagement. And with engagement, you obviously have to think of the dimensions of cooperation involved. And you have to see how this engagement obviates the possibilities of confrontation. I think that is a primary focus when it comes to approaching relations with China. I referred to the boundary question and the unresolved issues involved in that sphere between India and China. And I think if you look at the India-China relationship and the way it has been managed, the management regime, if you can call it, for India-China relations, I think it has been quite successful. We've maintained peace on our borders for decades now. We have mechanisms in place to enhance mutual confidence. Our trade and economic relationship has grown beyond all prognostications. It's an imbalanced relationship, but the fact is it's a huge relationship, and it's well poised to become one of the most important trading relationships of this century. So I think, the fact that we've been able to achieve so much with China, and there is room enough, I believe, for India and China to grow and to coexist and to engage with each other. There will obviously be competition in some areas, but that competition need not be self-defeating. It need not be a sort of a cancellation process as far as all the other things that we do. As much as, it may be projected in some sections of, public opinion in that fashion, but that is nowhere near happening because good sense, I believe, will prevail on both sides. When it comes to Southeast Asia, when it comes to India's growing profile in Southeast Asia and the very close ties that we have with countries in that region, all the ASEAN countries, we have watched what is happening in the South China Sea, obviously with a lot of interest and close attention. This is a dispute, a complex dispute, which involves a number of countries in the region. Now, there are many, obviously it has to be solved among the countries concerned and China. Our advocacy has always been for negotiation, for codes of conduct that would prevent conflict, that would, again, enhance mutual confidence, that would enable trade and normal communication and security interests of all concerned to be addressed adequately. We are very closely engaged, as you know, with the ASEAN Regional Forum and the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, which we are part of. We are part of the East Asia Summit. We've welcomed also the inclusion of Russia and the United States in that summit. So there are various mechanisms for cooperation and dialogue today for the countries concerned to get together to build an inclusive, a more stable, and a more lasting security architecture, which doesn't exclude one country to the advantage of the others, because that is not going to work. So if you ask me for my prescription, patience, moderation, and balance and maturity when you deal with these issues.
If I can just follow up on that as well. You mentioned competition with China. Would you care to sort of set out where you think that competition is most likely to arise, in which areas, on which questions?
Well, I think the world will always compare India and China and seek to attribute competitive paradigms to both countries. And there will obviously be areas around the world where India and China transact relations, try to build development partnerships, try to promote economic interests. But as I said, we need to approach this with not just with the hindsight of what we've gained in terms of experience from dealing with each other over the last 5 to 6 decades, including the difficult years, if I may say, but also with adequate foresight. Because ultimately, I think our development, our patterns, our political patterns of development in India and China have differed. The manner in which India and China are perceived in many of the countries we cooperate with or we transact relations with is different. And I think that difference will prevail. There will always be a difference of perception about the way India is seen and the way China is seen. And I don't think we are getting into a process here where India wants, to emulate China in all that it does. And I think that is an impractical way of approaching these matters. I think India has its strengths, has its capabilities, has its particularly Indian characteristics that appeal to a lot of our development partners, as you see in Africa, where we are delivering on capacity building, where we provide scholarships for people to come and study in India. The whole democratic experience of India is something that appeals to a lot of our African partners, for instance, and in Southeast Asia. So India has unique advantages, I believe. And China has its own advantages in terms of the burst it has been able to achieve in terms of economic development and the manner in which it has been able to transform the face of Chinese, the landscape, in fact, and Chinese life. So I believe there's a lot that also that India and China should be engaging with each other about and trying to learn from each other about in this process.
We'll take 2 questions at once to raise the tempo a little bit. First, Adam Roberts, and then the gentleman sitting immediately to his left.
I had 2 questions, but I better just ask one of them. Which is, you mentioned relations with Sri Lanka and how you saw the priorities at the present time. Could I ask if you've discussed the issue raised in the report to the UN Secretary General and how you think that report should be responded to? Thank you very much.
You could just pass the microphone along to the gentleman next to you.
Thank you. My name is Sarwar. I am the editor of Nation newspaper in London. My name is Sarwar. I am the editor of Nation newspaper in London.
I see.
My question is related to Indo-Pak talks. Both the countries have held several rounds of talks, but all remain inconclusive. What are the real issues and the problems which are invisible so far? The reason is one can ask both the countries, what did you discuss and what do you discuss for several days and nothing come out as a conclusion? And my second question is related to the peace in the South Asia area. The trust deficit between India and Pakistan is increasing very rapidly. And that is why one cannot see the long-lasting and durable peace in the region. We see the suicide attacks, we see the so many bomb blasts, not only in Pakistan, also in India, also in Afghanistan. So would it not be better that all 3 countries sit together and prevail a conducive situation in which all 3 countries can live in peace and harmony? Thank you.
It's a specific question on the Sri Lankan report and then the broader issue.
Yeah. Well, as far as the report by the UN panel on Sri Lanka is concerned, obviously this is a matter for the Sri Lankan government to address and to respond on the various concerns that have been raised in that report. Yes, there has been some contact and communication between India and Sri Lanka on this, but obviously the action will be before the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva. That is really where this report is going to be discussed. India's view has been, I'm talking of in principle, in a generic sense, that country-specific reports of this nature perhaps do not address or provide complete solutions for problems as complex as the problems that have troubled Sri Lanka over the last 3 decades and more, if I may say. I think the issue before us in the region as neighbors of Sri Lanka and for Sri Lanka itself is the question of how, since the war has ended, reconciliation can become a permanent achievement between the ethnic groups concerned, between the minority and the majority. I think that's really the challenge. How are you going to apply principles of reducing the trust deficit, the term that you used, and enhancing mutual confidence across the ethnic divide, of healing wounds from the war, of enabling the Tamil-speaking people, especially those who are left behind in the north. Many, as you know, migrated out of the country. There's been a huge, what shall I say, diminishing in numbers of the population in that part of the country because of the conflict conditions and because many educated people, many lawyers, many professionals, many teachers left the country during the war years. So I think the country will take some time to heal itself now that the war is over. I think the challenge before the Sri Lankan government, of course, is a very formidable one because it not only has to address the issue of reconstruction, of rehabilitation, of providing a normal, decent life once again to these thousands of people who have lost everything because of the civil war, and also to address the larger international climate of the way in which this whole conflict has been perceived. But I think you must remember that the LTTE, during the years that it was engaged, let me say, in the fight against the Sri Lankan government, was actually entrenched in the northern part of the country. There is very little that is really known about the kind of activities that went on as far as the civilian population was concerned at that time. It was not a normal situation even then. The whole story of that is not yet told, but I know that a lot of the population of that part of the island came out because of the abnormal conditions in that. And one cannot forget that the LTT was an organization that was defined and described as a terrorist organization, not just for Sri Lanka, but in India and across many, many countries of the world. So I think you need 2020 vision when you come to deliberating on these matters. These are very delicate matters. I know the sentiments of the minorities are involved, and the sentiments of the majority population in Sri Lanka is involved also. I think our aim should be a restorative process, a healing process that enables the two sides to come together once again, and above all, and let me stress this, for the unity and the territorial integrity of Sri Lanka to be preserved. I don't think there can be any other solution but that. But within a united Sri Lanka, we have to work for healing and for rebuilding and for a political settlement that allows the minority people of the north, the Tamil-speaking people of the north and the east for that matter, to have a greater say in running their own lives, to be able to rebuild their homes, to be able to provide good administration in their own areas of habitation and their cities and their towns and villages. And I think this is where the challenge lies before the Sri Lankan government to deliver on that.
And on the question of...
on the question of Pakistan.
A very broad question. So you refer to some of this in your formal remarks.
I did. Well, let me say that I had a very constructive discussion with my counterpart, Mr. Salman Bashir, in Islamabad. I just came back day before yesterday, in fact. And you must have seen the joint statement that was issued at the end of the talks. It was, I believe, a statement that contained, it encapsulated the essence of what we had discussed. Now, you must understand that there can be no dramatic breakthroughs in just one round of discussion or 2 rounds of discussion. Please don't look at such meetings as events in themselves. They're part of a process, part of an incremental process of trying to reduce the trust deficit that you spoke of, trying to enhance mutual confidence, trying to take graduated steps that can help relations between the 2 countries and help the people of the 2 countries above all. And that is where I stress the need for an atmosphere free of terror and violence. Now, safe havens and sanctuaries for those groups, if they exist on Pakistani soil, they will harm Pakistan, no doubt, but they harm Pakistan's neighbors. And it is in the interest of good neighborly relations, it's in the interest of the future of our relationship that Pakistan takes this point very, very seriously. Because otherwise, for our whole region, we will never be able to do away with the scourge of terrorism if you have a segmented approach to these matters. And I take your point about Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India together working to try and deal with these problems and to create a more stable environment in our region. But it would involve cooperation among all 3 countries. And I think Pakistan, at this moment, is absorbed in its own internal, the challenges that it has come to face internally because of terrorism. And also, between Pakistan and Afghanistan, as you know, the situation in terms of the terror groups that operate on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, they have thrown up very, very serious challenges. So India is always ready to work with our regional friends and partners to do whatever is necessary to build a stable Afghanistan, and also through that process for all the countries concerned, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and all our other neighbors, to really be able to develop a growth story that removes these challenges of poverty and deprivation that many of our population, many numbers in our population still continue to face. I think that should be the focus. The focus should be on people. I completely agree with you that more needs to be done in this regard. But if we keep to this process that we have started, now we've had all these meetings between the Indian and Pakistani ministries concerned over the last few months, culminating in my meeting with my counterpart in Islamabad a few days ago. The foreign minister of Pakistan is due to visit Delhi in July, and that in a sense will mark a culmination of this first phase of renewal of contact between the 2 sides. So I think we have to hope for this process to move forward, to gather further momentum, but obviously challenges and problems of this nature will take their time to be resolved.
We are running out of time for this meeting, but I do want to get at least 2 more questions in, one from each side of the room, if I may. First was a gentleman in the 4th row back. If you could just raise your hand so the microphone can reach you. Yes, you? No, behind you, sorry.
Me?
Yes, you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Bhupendra Jasani from King's College London. Many thanks for your very lucid presentation. In your talk, you mentioned India's interest in FMCT, provided it's verifiable. Now, as you know, that the US has always complained that it is not verifiable, and equally CTBT has the same problem. Are you going to be able to offer US some new technology for that? Thank you.
Thank you. And then the lady with a hand up right at the, near the back there. Yes, you? Thank you.
My question's of a more personal nature.
So could you identify yourself?
My name's Claire O'Connor. My questions of a more personal nature, perhaps the appropriate note on which to end. Thank you for your sort of geopolitical overview of India's foreign policy objectives. I'd like to ask, what are some of your personal priorities for your time as Foreign Secretary? Like, how are you going to define success? And perhaps you could share with us a couple of your favorite anecdotes from when you were ambassador to Beijing.
You can respond to that in whichever way you think is appropriate.
Well, on the FMCT, I think I made my
CTBT is
position.
an easier question to answer.
I made my position quite clear in my remarks. I think you'll have to read those remarks once again to really understand where we stand. Basically, that we support negotiations in the Conference on Disarmament, and that's where we would like to engage with all the other member countries, in the Conference on Disarmament. That is really the institution in which we should work for an FMCT. And on the CTBT, you know that we are committed to a moratorium on nuclear explosive testing. That has been our approach, our considered position. And this is a voluntary, unilateral moratorium on nuclear explosive testing. And I think we have stuck to it, and we have abided by it, and we have been very responsible about this. So that, as far as your question is concerned, as far as my personal anecdotes, it's very difficult to enumerate them. I've almost come to the end of my term as Foreign Secretary. I will be here exactly for another month when I shall lay down office. I think my priorities have been to focus, obviously, on the neighborhood, because I think the most serious challenges that we face, both not only for India, but also within the region, come from within our neighborhood. So I think the effort that we put in to recommence the dialogue with Pakistan is something that I invested a great deal of time and attention and commitment to also. I think I felt very strongly as a citizen of India that the future of my own country is also dependent on better relations with our neighbors and trying to see how we can push the processes of normalization while at the same time tackling the problems that we face from terrorism. With China, my association has been very long. It goes back 26 years, to be exact, from the time I dealt with China as a desk officer. And I've been associated with almost every stage in this process of reconnection, let me say, with China, because for about 14 years after 1962, as you know, ambassadorial relations with China had been suspended, and then we resumed those relations. But when I came to do a deal with the relationship in 1984, we were still at a very nascent stage of reconnecting and trying to rebuild this relationship. I was associated with the Rajiv Gandhi visit to China in 1988. I worked on that visit, and I was present in Beijing at that very historic and very moving moment, I think, when our young Prime Minister reached out to Deng Xiaoping and Chao Tse-yang and Li Peng and others, and talked the language of normalization and articulated that political vision that he felt was necessary to articulate in order to address these very difficult challenges that this relationship had faced in the past. And then I came back to dealing with China after my High Commissionership to Sri Lanka. I went back to a very transformed China. I was returning after about a decade or so, and just to be able to sense and to witness the dynamism of that change, to be present during the Beijing Olympics in Beijing, and to just to be, present just at that moment. I think again a very key moment in China's history. I think was quite special and unique. We've had, of course, the complexities and challenges in our relationship with China continue. There's no doubt about that. But I think the test and the manner in which both countries tackle these problems with maturity and with foresight, as I said, looking to the future. I think that's where the attention will need to be focused for the future. I think both governments should be able to drive this debate in the right direction, because there are many voices that seek to crowd out what you are doing in terms of normalization. And the challenge will be to address those voices and to be able to put across a cogent, coherent line that speaks of both a sense of vision and a sense of direction, and also the need for pragmatism and to take practical measures to see how we can bring India and China closer together.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much indeed. With the ISS, very happy that twice in your term as Foreign Secretary you've come to address us, and we certainly look forward to maintaining that contact with you and your new guys, which I believe is soon to be officially announced. But please join me again in a round of applause for the Foreign Secretary.